Hello everyone, today I'm looking at Metal Gear Solid Substance and Subsistence, respectively for Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3. So these were games that I obviously played Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 a long time ago, and for 3, I originally played the Subsistence version of it, but I realized that I hadn't actually touched a lot of the stuff on the special extra features for Subsistence. And really because of Metal Gear Solid Delta coming out recently, I was kind of reintroduced to the whole monkey catching minigame, and really more so from the fact that I had recently played Ape Escape and absolutely loved it, and they had a Metal Gear Solid parody in their games. I felt kind of compelled to go into this and try out my Metal Gear Solid extra, things or whatever. So I was pretty surprised. So Substance was, again, fairly fun, but also a little bit annoying on some levels. So the one thing they show you, and this is very much a product of the time, is that there's over 450 VR missions, which to me just sounds like torture, because pure gameplay without any story is not enjoyable for me. It's not a fun experience. But in any case, there were actually some pretty nice variety for some of the games. There is the whole sort of meta element as you're playing these levels that you bear in mind that in Raiden's perspective, all of this VR training and all these video games are just another form of him to train for the real operation and the real mission. So from everything from simulating Metal Gear Solid 1 to all the weapons training, it kind of makes sense from that perspective. What's also very interesting about it too is that I just have to get this out of the way, that replaying Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 and seeing all these, the hype about Delta made me realize I love Konami, or I love Kojima rather, and his stories and characters, whatever, but I've never really super enjoyed the actual gameplay of Metal Gear Solid. I've found it to be incredibly frustrating, and I think that's something people just glaze over because everything else is built very well. There's always these small little mechanics that you never knew existed, which are super cool, but the basic gameplay is actually super annoying. Because what I constantly run into is that I'll be trying to prone against a wall, and I'll end up slipping and like moving the control stick too much, and sometimes I want to sneak and I push too much on these really big control sticks that are kind of meant for fighting games, and it's really just super frustrating that it seems like the game never does what I want. Sometimes I jump off a ledge when I didn't mean to, or I'm trying to sneak up on a guard, and it always is a constant feeling of the game never doing what I intend. I didn't mean to push that block. I didn't mean to jump up there. I didn't mean to suddenly go this way. I'm trying to put down a book and I can't do it because I'm too close to a wall because Snake suddenly needs room to place something down. It's always been super frustrating. And I will say that playing the VR missions in Substance were kind of a refresher, because when you don't have all these cutscenes back to back, you can really immerse yourself in the actual gameplay and figuring out, okay, how do I pull off headshots, how I do all this stuff. And so I did come to like it a little bit more. I also got the hang of going around corners and aiming my M9. That actually felt really good. Once you understand, okay, I'm going to hold up the control stick, press R2 to peek around, and then press the attack button square and R1 at the same time to go in first person mode, so therefore I can aim. Because if you just shoot with the attack button in that form without aiming in first person mode, you're just going to hit the enemy in the chest and they're not going to have the KO, and they're going to see you, and then you get alarmed, and so on and so forth. So once I got the hang of actually being able to sneak around and do more or less what I wanted to, I got a better experience. But I was also reminded of how unfortunate the controls are in the Metal Gear Solid games. They are really not fun, and because of all the cutscenes, you don't ever get really acclimated to them. You just kind of are thrown into new situations with new things before you even master the old techniques. And I feel that's the one issue with Metal Gear Solid, specifically 3, is that I felt like it just changed too much for me to get a hang of one mechanic or one strategy before it was moving on to something completely different. It was just moving too fast, ironically. Or there was too little content to really master your skills. And with VR missions, you definitely felt that. I got really, really good at holding up people and doing stuff like that. But at the same token, at the end of the day, they're just extra missions. It's just padding, like in the first Metal Gear Solid Special Edition. Or at least in the very first Metal Gear Solid, I didn't realize this, but even in the first one, it has VR missions that are just 10 of them. And it's a similar kind of structure here, where you have 10 missions for sneaking, 10 for elimination, or whatever. And it's initially just in a fabricated block type virtual map where you have to get from one end to the other, or you have to get to the exit, or you have to do a certain technique or objective, and then the endpoint will appear and then it'll score you on it. And so you have, based on your time, your ammunition left, it'll give you a score based on how well you perform. What's also cool is that there are also weapons training, and I found that to be very, very useful. It also, again, hinges on the whole aspect of writing training to become a soldier without actually being one, as the meme soldier, essentially. I found it very interesting because, that's what training in the future might possibly look like, VR training with weapons and whatnot. But also from a very practical aspect, there's a lot of techniques and functions of the weapons that you just don't get to try out when you have limited ammo and resources. And yeah, you can load a dead save and mess around, but it's a lot more fun when you're actually in an environment where you have live targets you need to shoot at. So just things like pressing L1 to run with an assault rifle while firing, having the know-how that if you hold down the weapon button for the claymore, you can place it in any direction you want, getting a feel for exactly what the cones of vision do. For example, it took me a while to figure out that if you're actually on the edge of the cone, they'll see you and they'll come and investigate, but if you're too close, then they'll just be alerted. And it just getting the muscle memory or the notion of what exactly is the best distance to be at. So while I wouldn't recommend it from a narrative perspective, it was actually a good way to get accustomed to the game's controls, which are, I would be honest, very convoluted and complicated and unintuitive until you get used to them. The control system in Metal Gear Solid is, I would say, not good. I'd say it's overly complicated, and it makes up for it with a lot of other aspects: story, music, characters, and the overall tone of the game. And the feeling that you suck at the game rather than the game itself controls kind of, I wouldn't say poorly, but in a very weird, convoluted way. Like I said, just peeking around a corner and aiming your gun at an enemy involves like 4 different button prompts, which are just very convoluted, but that's the essence of what we're dealing with here. So out of all of the VR missions, I would say the most complicated ones, I mean, oh my god, there were these first-person VR missions that were the worst thing ever, and it made sense why Kojima never bothered doing a first-person mode for any of its games, even though that was the trend at the time. I mean, they could have figured out, I guess, but the way they had those VR missions set up for first-person is that it was essentially tank controls, where yes, you could aim with the right stick, which was great, and it worked exactly how you'd think it'd work. But for the left stick for movement, it also moved the camera when you moved. So if you move forward and turn right, you'll actually look right and turn and go straight. So it was a nightmare to play those levels. I think there was one level, the 4th one, where like it's stupidly difficult, where it's pitch dark. Your only weapon that you can see in the dark is your USP lethal weapon, and has a huge ass flashlight attached to it, so that means every time you flash it, everyone's alerted to your position if they can see you on the edge of their cone to come and investigate. So that was constantly getting headshots. That was the only way to survive that level. And then if you do get spotted and alerted, they send a lot of guys after you with bulletproof shields, which you need to equip an assault rifle to get through, or stun grenades or something. So that was just really difficult. It was not fun, and yeah, I would not want to do that again. Besides from that, though, I did actually get stuck on one additional mission, or the variety missions. The variety missions were interesting. I mean, I wish I finished them. Some of them were minefields where you had to dodge a bunch of mines. One of them was you had to do a bunch of hanging missions. I didn't realize that you could just drop from the top of a skyscraper, and as long as you mash triangle before you hit the ground, and there's a ledge there, you can grab onto it with no penalty whatsoever, which looks ridiculous. You wouldn't think it works, but it does. And again, that's a lot of things about Metal Gear Solid and its mechanics. They're all, I mean, there's a lot of them. They're very interesting. A lot of them are pretty convoluted. But the only way you really learn about them is through trial and error. And the VR missions give you exactly what you want in terms of that trial and error, which is really nice. But that's the main thing that I really enjoyed or got away from the experience, I would say. But the one mission I did get stuck on was the Protect Merrill mission with the sniper rifle. I have no idea how to do that. Even with diazepam and the sniper, they are sending literally 100 guys to go and, attack Meryl. And it's not like she is a health bar where she's getting whittled down. If they so much as touch her, the mission is over. And so you have a non-lethal sniper and a main sniper with a huge magazine, unlimited ammo. It doesn't matter. Your thing is too wobbly. You can't hit your targets. It was literally impossible. I could not figure out how to do it except being super accurate. If I had Call of Duty controls, it would be a different story. But because there's always this constant sensitivity on the stick and this, what do you call this, echo or this overdrag of when you look, you never just stop. You kind of move up in these sluggish kind of segments, probably like a real sniper rifle. So more realistic and incredibly frustrating. I couldn't do it. And it wasn't these things where I was trying again and again and again. I tried probably a dozen times. And I just said, I don't see how it's possible to beat this level. So I left that. And then I went on to the alternative VR missions. And those were pretty fun. And they were things like bomb defusal, elimination, hold up mode. Hold up mode was a lot of fun because as soon as you hold up the enemy, they disappear. And in the original game, if you hold up an enemy, they're subdued. But if you ever go in front of their cone of vision and they see that you're not holding them up anymore, they'll immediately attack you. But in this one, they're just eliminated. I found that to be really fun and really enjoyable, and getting the fastest possible time felt really good, because as long as you're, and again, that's the other thing, I love how you figure out you could be a meter away sometimes from these guys, it looks like, and you can still say freeze and hold them up. And it's just a matter of, again, trial and error and figuring out what actually works. And I feel those VR missions are almost necessary for going into any Metal Gear game. I think they're actually very useful mechanically, because again, you're not going to get the mechanical know-how from playing the game normally, because again, it's going to intercede it with a bunch of other quick time events and other things that just take away. I think it's cool that these games have all these different gadgets, like the cigar thing and the cigar smoke that makes someone pass out, but you never actually get to use them. Like, you'll use them a couple times and be like, okay, cool, but there's this way more effective method of just shooting everyone in the head silently with a silenced pistol. So it's cool you have all these things, but you never really get to utilize them, and it's really frustrating sometimes. I would say, though, my absolute favorite minigame, and I know this is so stupid, was actually the photography one that you unlock after doing all the other alternative VR missions. The photography mode is just going around and finding certain targets to photograph. And initially, it's very tongue-in-cheek. It's pictures of the poster girls that are inside the lockers. You have to find this girl. Where is she? And then another time you have to find, it'll show you a close-up of like the eyebrow or like a mole or something else. And so that was kind of funny. You can tell the developers were having fun with that. What I also really liked is that there's another one where it's like Raiden's dead, naked on the floor, and it says, "Go find Raiden's murderer." And you're like, oh, okay, I have to play a little investigation now. I'm like a detective. And so it was a lot of fun. It was very cool that you have to, use a little bit of deduction and other things And now suddenly we're playing a very different kind of game. And what's very funny about that whole sequence is you have Revolver Ocelot kind of standing nonchalantly in the hallway, and he's watching Fat Man do like donuts inside this test chamber, and then Vamp is chilling out just standing on the ceiling. And it's funny because it turns out it's none of them. It's a poster of Snake in the other room, which just doesn't really make any sense, but okay, sure, whatever. I know, I found it to be pretty funny. And of course, the absolute last segment of that, the last level, was honestly the best, because it's the girls' locker room, or the locker room with all the girl posters, but instead of asking you what girl to find, they're asking you to based on the developer's taste. So like, okay, based on the script writer, he's 31, somewhat single, what kind of girl is his favorite, what's his type, depending on his interests. And I'm like, I don't know. So I have to do like a psychological profile of the guy and figure out who he likes. And the absolute peak moment is, my friend was there, is because every time you fail, it gives you a new different type of objective. So about maybe the 5th or 6th time, it said, okay, what is Hideo Kojima's type? And we were there like, okay, we have to take this seriously now. We have to take this very seriously. So we opened up all the lockers, we saw all the girls, and we concluded, okay, it's got to be the girl that most looks like Quiet. And he's like, are you sure? It's like, yeah, sure, let's go for it. And, you know, bear in mind, we hadn't won up until this point. So we take a photo of like the one girl we think that looks like Quiet, and we won. So I got Kojima's type off the bat immediately. I knew what he wanted. I knew what he liked. I laughed so hard because that was such a fun, stupid mini game. Anyway, that's pretty much Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance. There are other cool segments in there as well. There's one bomb defusal thing and like an apartment building style complex. There was also in that, there was Snake Tales. So obviously they heard the feedback from the fans. They were very, very upset with not being able to play Snake, or at least only in the tanker mission. And so you have this whole segment where you're basically replaying a lot of Metal Gear Solid 2, but you're just as Snake with a very fanfic background story to it. In fact, all of the story are told through a bunch of written like panels, and they range from serious things like, oh, there's terrorists on the big shell, to Snake and company have to hunt down a giant sea monster, you know, Loch Ness monster type thing called Galugovich, which turns out to be a giant soldier NPC that is swimming in the waters like the Loch Ness monster, and for some reason you have to take a photo of it to complete the mission. So just, you know, crazy funny stuff like that. So you can tell they were having a lot of fun with Substance. But aside from that, it was basically replaying a lot of Metal Gear Solid 2 as Snake, and I just really didn't care. Like, the story wasn't there or anything, so I just like, okay, whatever. And they recycled a lot of the VR missions as well, so I just was not about that. And of course, they also had skateboarding, or as I like to call it, snakeboarding. And that was ridiculous. I just always thought that was a mod. Every time I saw that, I thought it was like, you know, this has to be a mod. This has to be a thing someone made. No, they were so into, I guess, Tony Hawk games at the time, they thought we need to put this in our game. So yes, Metal Gear skateboarding is real. You can play as Snake or Raiden, and they're very similar levels to the Big Shell. And you just basically go around it, and it works just like a Tony Hawk game in the sense that, you know, you press X to ollie, you have, you know, grab, spin, whatever. You can do tricks, you can grind on rails and stuff and find hidden things, you can collect points, and then there's like 4 or 5 secret things to do around the Big Shell. One of them being destroying all the cipher bots, collecting all the rations, the special collectibles, that's stuff like that. And, you know, the timer is set for something like 5 or 10 minutes, and you basically just skate around and do stuff. Honestly, as much as I love the concept of it, I really hated playing that, honestly. For whatever reason, I couldn't get a lot of air. I don't know if I was ollieing incorrectly and just pressing X at the wrong time, but I never seemed to have enough air and enough oomph to get to where I wanted to, and that was just, very frustrating. Besides that, though, it was a very comical experience. I really liked it, and the soundtrack was basically the main theme again, but played with guitars in like a punk rock style. It was very, very fun and enjoyable. I'll give you that much, but I would not recommend it. It was actually very frustrating to actually play. I did not enjoy it, and I do enjoy at least the old Tony Hawk games on N64 and PS1. And that is pretty much all the content for Substance. I mean, it's pretty much a bunch of VR missions. The other thing they do with the VR missions is that they just have different characters. So you have either Raiden or Snake, and I just did them all as Snake, and as you're playing as Snake, you unlock different costumes. So as I was playing as Snake, at some point I unlocked Pliskin, so I could play as Pliskin. So I thought, okay, that's cool, but it's the exact same missions, just with a slightly different uniform. So it's really, if you really like the gameplay of Metal Gear Solid, you would get Substance, and I bought it on eBay recently, and I don't really think it was worth it, to be honest. It was a nice experiment. It was cool to check it out, but I was not super impressed by the content therein. It was kind of like whatever. But yeah, I'm glad to say I can say I've played Metal Gear Solid skateboarding or snakeboarding and see what it's like, and yeah, it's frustrating. But yeah, that's Substance. I guess we'll talk about Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. And while I played this back in the day, again, like I said, I came back to it because of the monkey catching mini game. And seeing it in HD, it looks like definitely a more fun version, because I'll be honest, this version of Ape Escape and Metal Gear Solid is not super fun. It's okay, you basically are equipped with a tranquilizer type gun and stun grenades, depending on the level, and you go through about 6 or 7 levels, and you have a preamble from Campbell where he's like, oh, these monkeys have escaped, you have to go catch them, whatever. And so Snake goes around catching monkeys, and so there's roughly a dozen per level based on other locations in the game. There's one level where they have a giant monkey Metal Gear, and it's just standing there. It doesn't do anything, but yeah, you can basically stun monkeys with a gun. You can throw a grenade and it'll stun them all in an area, and as soon as you touch them, it'll be like the animation from Ape Escape where you basically catch them and it does a little animation and whatever. The animations in Delta are so much better, though. Like, I'm kind of honestly jealous that the Delta version of this mini game looks much better. But in the original Subsistence in 3, I'm not really a fan of it, to be honest. It just isn't very fun. All the music is basically recycled. There's not an added monkey thing. The only thing I know you get from it is that you get the banana camouflage if you do all of them. Aside from that, the final level is even just the field for the big boss, or for the boss fight, and you just find a bunch of monkeys in the field and take them out, and it ends like that. That's it. There's I was actually really disappointed there was not a lot to the Ape Escape minigame. It feels very rudimentary, and it only feels like it's a bigger deal now that Delta came out, and the Delta version just looks way more fun for whatever reason, and hopefully they added a lot more there in Delta, but I haven't played it, so I can't comment on that. Aside from that, I think I talked about this in my Ape Escape 3 review, is that the Ape Escape 3 version of their Metal Gear Solid crossover is way more fun. I mean, I'll be honest, mechanically Ape Escape is a way more fun game than Metal Gear. Metal Gear has a great story, but Ape Escape has the gameplay. Aside from that, there in the Subsistence disc, there is also... what was it? Oh, there's like a hidden cinema, and so it's all these bloopers of Snake and the cast, where as if they were on a movie set, and all the like things they messed up on. So like Eva I think not missing your shots, but killing Snake or Ocelot super early when they're not supposed to, and a bunch of other comedic things where if you saw them on YouTube, you think, oh wait, that happens? Then it's like, no, that's like a blooper, a fake. It's literally a fake scene. It's not AI. It's a fake scene from the original Metal Gear Solid Subsistence, which I find to be very endearing from Kojima and his cinema-like qualities. There is also a boss rush mode, which I'll be honest, I don't care about. Fighting the bosses in Metal Gear Solid, I mean, it's a nice way to access them without having to go through the whole game. I guess back when games were confined and constrained in certain ways and people actually wanted to do things like boss rushes. In some games they were mandatory, like for example Devil May Cry. That was certainly a thing that they kind of did near the end game to really test the player, which is sometimes fun, but I found it sometimes annoying, honestly, because you're just fighting the same guy again, and they just have a very specific moveset, and it's just knowing that very specific moveset that you just have to memorize, and it's usually not that complicated or that hard. But in any case, that's what they decided to go with, and it just feels like padding, so I don't have much else to say about that, except that it might be a good mode to experiment things with the boss back when people didn't know all the different mechanics, like using the smoke grenades on the pain or using the suicide pill on the fear. But yeah, like I said, only if you're a real gameplay enthusiast is that going to attract you. Yeah, and of course the main thing that Subsistence is known for, and the main reason that I got that version back in the day when I did get a PS2 and decided to play Metal Gear Solid 3 for the first time, is that I just saw that Subsistence in the base game had a third-person camera that you could rotate it like modern controls, and I just thought, okay, that looks way better, and the way the game looks like it's supposed to be played. If I was relegated to the old style, I would just be super frustrated, where it's all in these little, I mean, it's bird's eye view, but it's specific fixed camera angle boxes. And it just seemed like the free camera was the right way to play it and the modern way to play it. It's funny though, because replaying the intro of 3, I forgot this, that by clicking in the right stick, you can change the camera on the fly to the old version. So it's really cool they kept that legacy feature in there so you can see what it's like. And yeah, for maybe like Metal Gear Solid 1, you're in a very square, geometrically predictable environment. That makes sense to have fixed camera angles and boxed in things to focus you on exactly what you have to look at. But for the organic, wild, random landscape of Metal Gear Solid 3, that's really not necessary. And I think fixed angles do have their time and place. For example, Resident Evil is a master at this, where there's a certain item you need, or a certain enemy, or a shadow of an enemy that's telegraphing something's around the corner. Fixed camera angles can be very, very useful, powerful. I think God of War actually utilized them quite a lot. But in any case, yeah, the use of its camera angles just feels archaic, and at least for a game like Metal Gear Solid 3, the fact they put it in the first edition that they could kind of speaks to the fact that they wanted to do that from the beginning. So it feels more organic that way. Aside from that, I guess I should also mention Substance. There are Tinker missions that you can play as Raiden now, which is okay, cool, whatever. But yeah, that is kind of the small collection of the Metal Gear Solid spin-offs that I just kind of wanted to cover. I feel for 3, it's definitely worth playing the Subsistence version. I don't think anyone's looking at the top-down view and thinking, oh yeah, that's how you're supposed to play it. There's original and then there's original. If it came out within a year making those changes, I think it's safe to say that they consider those to be the superior versions. As to how they measure up to Metal Gear Solid Delta, I can't really say from what I've seen of it since I haven't played it. I mean, it seems to be a faithful one-to-one recreation of the original, which honestly all I can ask for. I've heard some talk here and there about certain minor changes that they've made, but they seem inconsequential, and this is Konami's baby. It's a Japanese developer. They're very serious. They're not going to change a bunch of things extremely. And overall, it looks like a very fun game, and for those who have never played the game before, I really am excited for this whole revival of Metal Gear Solid 3 and that whole Metal Gear Solid universe, because this really is the progenitor of that whole series. The only thing I would say, though, is that where I stand in the Metal Gear Solid series is that 2 is my absolute favorite because of the story and the writing and the setting. And even though 3s are other people's favorites, I just, as much as I like 3 in certain aspects, I've come to weirdly appreciate it more in time by being frustrated by how... I'm frustrated by how well Peace Walker was written, and the boss's motivations were so clear. And my one gripe that I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a second and talk about is the motivations of the boss and the motivations on Big Boss, or Naked Snake, in this version, and how they reflect each other. Because the main, I think, aspect that was missing and misconstrued in 3 is that the boss died for her country as a secret agent, as a patriot, even though she's Snake's mother figure. And the main issue with that is, well, she never acts like a mother figure to Snake. She's just very tough on him. She's just a hard ass to him. And she's really recontextualized in Peace Walker, where her performance, her role is more maternal, where she's wanting to sacrifice herself to give her children a chance, which are both her genes, Ocelot, and her memes, John, who is Naked Snake and Big Boss. And they end up, she ends up saving the world to preserve them, and they end up becoming the 2 that shake the world to its very foundations with all of their stupid Guns of the Patriots nonsense. And the whole prevailing theme of Metal Gear Solid is about the individual prevailing over the forms of government, of control, of nations, of identities. This goes back to, I forget, the Czechoslovakian ice skater in Metal Gear 2, where she talked about her hopes and her dreams for the future, her personal aspirations, and how she wishes that people could just be seen as people and individuals rather than by nations and ideologies and whatever. And that far back, that's always been a theme that's resonated with me and the whole series. And I just feel like 3 did a poor job of delivering that, where she died as like a hero to the government. But the whole point is that after that scene, Snake goes AWOL and makes himself an enemy of the United States government and the Patriots. So the boss's dream was to make something more akin to Outer Heaven, that she did it in a sacrificial, maternal way to make sure that the world would still have life and hope in it, which again is the main theme, or the ending theme, from Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, where Meryl says to David, just live, where Snake says to Raiden, he says, just live, just have the opportunity to give life. And he goes back to Rosemary and gets their son at the end of 4. Anyway, that's kind of all I wanted to say. I feel like the boss makes a lot more sense in Peace Walker. In this game, she just lets Snake get shot in the eye. She lets him get destroyed. We found out after the fact she, says spare his life to, Eva and all these other things. But she never acts like a mother, which is my one issue. But yeah, that's pretty much Metal Gear Solid Substance and Subsistence. They're fine kind of, early type DLCs and additions to those games, but nothing super amazing, I would say. I mean, Subsistence actually felt kind of underpowered. You're really getting it for the camera angles and the camera, facet for the third game and the main story. For 2, I'd say it's kind of worth it. It is interesting to see all these different facets and things, but ultimately, if you actually go for 100%ing that, it's a lot of repetition, and it's very kind of frustrating and whatever, but it is kind of novel to see. Anyway, that's pretty much all I got to say about these ones. I'll see you later, guys. Bye.